So, in life, we're always looking for what confirms our beliefs. We'll always pay attention to the things that tell us that we're right. And as sports fans, we are always looking for kind of the same thing. We're looking for what's going to tell us that our team is the best, that our team is going to beat the bad guys. Well, there's one ESPN metric that tells us something pretty darn close to that. And I'm telling you today why you should believe it and also why buyer should beware.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, but you can also find us on YouTube as well. So check us out on the go. You can listen to us. You can also watch us, whether it's your podcast, your preferred podcast platform, or on YouTube. We are always free. My name is Caroline Fenton, and I am your host, as I am every day. You can find me on Twitter at Caroline Fenton1. Also follow along with the podcast at Locked On LSU. So there are so many different algorithms and analytics and numbers that are out there for so many different sports. I think baseball is probably one that seems the most obvious of all sorts of numbers that are crunched into percentages, and whenever the wind is blowing 17 miles per hour to the east west and the rain, then this pitcher pitches this ERA. We've gotten down to the nitty-gritty. We have crunched every single possible number, it seems like, in sports, but I know that there's an analytics guy out there that's going to say, no, no, no. On the contrary, we have yet another one. But one of those numbers, one of those metrics being ESPN FPI. Now, that's ESPN's Football Power Index, which basically takes all of the information at hand. It combines returning players, it combines recruiting classes, it combines returning production, it combines strength of schedule, coaching staff, all of these different factors, and puts it all into one. And ESPN runs this model with all of the information at hand for each individual college football program. And it runs this model thousands and thousands and thousands of times. And that spits out the FPI, the ESPN Football Power Index. And I kind of view it almost as like one of those like math algorithms that you don't really ask exactly what it is, you just trust them. That's kind of how the FPI is. It combines all of these different factors. So ESPN's FPI has been released for the 2023 season, and I will get right to it and say the FPI loves LSU this season. ESPN's FBI has LSU as the fourth ranked team in the country based off of FPI, ranked number fourth overall. So, of course, when we as people, as human beings, as sports fans, will always latch on to some of those factors that confirm what we believe is true, that our team is the best. So if you're an LSU fan, you're looking at it and saying, you know what, that FPI, that's a good metric for success. And I also will couch everything that I'm saying with this. Once Labor Day weekend comes around, nobody cares about FPI. Once week one is off and running and we can see some of these teams come to fruition, nobody cares about what the FPI had you ranked as. But today on April 20th, happy April 20th to those who celebrate. On April 20th, it's an exciting way to kind of project how this season is going to go. It's especially exciting when your team is ranked fourth overall in the FPI. So I want to kind of tell you what the FPI is good for and why you should be skeptical. And I will start with the good stuff. I'm feeling good today. It's a sunny day where I am. I'll start with the good stuff. Comparing ESPN's FPI preseason 2022 to the final ESPN rankings of 2022. If you compare them, it's really not crazy far off. And I say this as a good thing because if LSU finishes fourth in the country this upcoming season, I think we'd all feel pretty darn good about it. And of course, I know that there's a lot that needs to go right in order for these top four teams. Because, like I mentioned, LSU's number 4, Ohio State 1, Alabama 2, Georgia 3, LSU 4. Your final rankings aren't going to be this way because you're not going to have 3 SEC teams in the college football playoff. There would have to be a whole lot going right for those 3 teams in order for there to be 3 SEC teams in the final 4. But you kind of catch my drift. If we're just looking at LSU individually, Ohio State 1, Alabama 2, Georgia 3, LSU 4, Texas 5, which I don't know what Texas is paying the FPI every single year. Texas always creeps into the top 5, top 10 every single year in the FPI. This is 2023. Let's go back to 2022 to kind of compare of how reliable of a system can this really be. This was the ESPN FPI preseason compared to postseason rankings. Had Georgia number 1 in the FPI? Well, you know what, FPI, you got that right because Georgia won the national title. They were the number 1 team postseason in the 2022 rankings. FPI had Alabama 2. Final rankings, Alabama was 5. Now, this is the interesting thing. The FPI had Ohio State and Michigan 3 and 4, respectively. Those 2 teams flip flopped in the final rankings 3 and 4. Final rankings, of course, as we know, TCU, the number 2 ranked team in the country that miraculously found its way to the college football playoff into the national title this past year. Alabama ranked at 5. So you're looking at the top 5. The FPI got 4 out of the 5 teams right. Now, that 5th team that was not in the final 5 rankings but was in the FPI, which I think is actually really interesting, was Tennessee. And we all know Tennessee absolutely outperformed most recent expectations. Tennessee was one of the most electric teams in the country to watch offensively. Tennessee really had their ticket to the college football playoff really kind of punched if they hadn't just messed up against South Carolina, hadn't Hooker hadn't torn his ACL, and either they wouldn't as if they would have taken care of business, Tennessee probably would have ended up closer how the FBI projected them than how they really ended up checking out or turning out at the end of the season. So I think that was interesting. They had Penn State at 6, Texas 7. Again, what in the world are we doing putting Texas in the top 10 every year? Utah 8, Clemson 9, LSU 10. And Penn State also was in the top 10. Utah ended up being in the top 10 ultimately. But what the FPI doesn't project is teams like a Tulane finding their way into the top 25. Teams like Washington, with their transfer portal quarterback last season, Michael Penix Jr., absolutely exceeding expectations. What they don't account for is teams like Texas. Like every year, they seem to return a lot of talent. They have a fairly favorable schedule, but teams like Texas that always seem to lose more games than they're supposed to lose. A team that the FPI have projected as a top 10 team, Texas barely even skated into the top 25. So while I think the FPI, at least last year, and I could go back years and years and years, I'm not going to do that, but I could. Just looking at last year as the smallest sample size, the FPI can at least project teams that we, as simple observers of college football, might not be able to find, like Tennessee being a top 5 team in the country. I think a lot of people expected Tennessee to be better this past season than they were being absolutely dreadful over the last 10 to 15 years. I wouldn't have projected them as a top 5 team, but the FPI kind of projected that. And I think that's where you bring in LSU, and that should make you feel very optimistic as an LSU fan. Let's get to the negative side of the FPI, and I want to get into that coming up next. So something exciting is coming to built.com on April 22nd. Set your calendars. I don't have all the details yet, but the excitement is real and it is something that I promise you don't want to miss. So if you know how Built Bar works, they have the most incredible protein bars in the world. They are my favorite. And they do these amazing flavor drops with unreal flavors in limited quantities. So mark your calendars, head to built.com on Saturday, April 22nd. That is this Saturday. I know you're going to be watching the LSU spring game, but set your alarm so while you're watching the spring game, you can also go to built.com and you can be one of the first to discover what all of the Built hype is about. I cannot wait to see what this new flavor is. So make sure to use promo code LOCKEDON15, LOCKEDON15. It's the numbers, not spell it out, and you will get 15% off your order. Well, thanks for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. Every dayers. Tomorrow on the show, we will get into a little bit of basketball. Transfer portal players coming in, transfer portal players coming out. Plus, Brian Kelly spoke with the media on Thursday. So we'll have a full breakdown on what Brian Kelly had to say to the media on Thursday ahead of the spring game on Saturday. So make sure to check that out. That'll be on your preferred podcast platform and on YouTube on Friday. So the ESPN FPI absolutely loves LSU, absolutely adores LSU. It has LSU, the number 4 team in the country per this FPI, behind Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia. In comparing the FPI from last year to the final rankings of last year, they really weren't that far off. Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, Tennessee, Penn State, Utah, all projected as top 10 teams, which all ended up being top 10 teams. It's not a perfect metric. Nothing really is. We may want to take it as Bible because one, we don't have a whole lot to hold on to in April, and we just have to take every single little bit of college football content that we can get to just to keep us satiated until September. I hear you. I know I'm the same way. They also want to buy it and take it as Bible because it projects very attractively for LSU. But let's set the record straight about exactly what the FPI is. It's numbers, it's metrics, it's a total analytical breakdown of college football. If I know anything about college football, and if you know anything about college football, which I know we both do, it's that weird things happen in this sport. It's that you can combine all of these numbers and metrics and run the model hundreds of thousands of times and it can give you a result. But who would have projected or predicted that South Carolina, with a Spencer Rattler that was playing pretty horrendously, would upset a Tennessee team that had the top offense in the country in one of the last few weeks of the year? I probably wouldn't have. Who could have projected that? I don't know what else crazy. The A&M game early in the season. Who did they lose to? App State. Who would have projected that Texas A&M, preseason top 5 team with the number 1 recruiting class in the country, would have lost to App State? Who would have thought that Florida would have lost to Vanderbilt, or Kentucky with their returning quarterback would have lost to Vanderbilt? I know those are kind of hyper SEC specific, but still crazy things happen in this sport. So take all of this with a grain of salt. Also, understanding FPI a little bit more, I think you can start to see some flaws or some holes poked in the system. Because I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's pretty easy to pick preseason top 5 or top 10. You've got the repeat offenders. You want me to throw 10 teams out there that might be in the top 10 this year? Okay, Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Clemson, Utah, maybe LSU is thrown in there. Maybe a Florida State is thrown in there. Maybe an Oregon is thrown in there. Maybe USC is thrown in there. The repeat offenders. It's when you start to get into the nitty gritty middle where you start to see a whole lot of flaws in the FPI and you start to see why it may not be a very reliable metric to go off of. Of course, it's all we have to go off of. But remember, come September, nobody cares about the FPI. Come October, when you're getting in the nitty gritty of your conference schedule, nobody cares about the FPI. But it's what we've got to work with now. So let's look at the middle of the 2023 FPI. The way that I view it, FPI is you're given a number. Ohio State is 31.5. What that number means, I have no idea. Alabama is given a number, 28.2, as the number 2 team in the country per FPI. I don't know exactly what those numbers mean, but I know the difference in them. I view that as that's the difference in strength of your team. Kind of how we look at spreads. So I don't think it's crazy to think that Ohio State could potentially be a 3 or 4 point favorite over Alabama. Now, if that's the spread, I'm taking Alabama plus the 3 or 4. Then you start to look at, okay, LSU. If LSU hosts Texas, that would make LSU a 1 point favorite. Well, I don't think that's really right. I don't know. Maybe Texas losing Bijan Robinson, Quinn Ewers coming back from an injury, LSU returning an offensive coordinator and a quarterback, a 1 point favorite. I'd probably give LSU a little bit more juice than that. But that's nitpicky, right? A couple points here, a couple points there, but let's get into the middle of it. Let's look at Florida State. First team on LSU's schedule. They are ranked 14th in the FPI with a value worth 15. We all know what we know about Florida State. Their quarterback, Jordan Travis, was lights out last season. Mike Norvell absolutely saved his job last year. Everyone's projecting Florida State to be a powerhouse this year. Again, projections don't matter. Come September, that's all we have to work off of right now. Returning players, returning production. If you want to look at returning production, Florida State's one of the best, if not the best in the country. But let's look at their in-state rival, Florida. Florida is ranked 18th in the FPI. Florida is given an FPI numerical value of 12.7. Let's look at that in terms of a spread. Florida State at 15, Florida at 12.7. You're telling me that Florida State would be a 3.5 point favorite against Florida on a neutral site? Florida State, a team that's returning their quarterback, a team that is returning more production than any other team in the country, against Florida, a team that has no quarterback, against Florida, a team that went, 7-6 last year, against a Florida team who's really the only bright spot on their team was their running back and their quarterback left for the NFL draft. You're telling me today, on a neutral field, Florida would only be a 3-point dog to Florida State? I'm not buying that. So when we look at it, just use your brain, use your knowledge, use what you know about college football. If you were to make a way too early top 20, maybe not way too early, preseason top 25, your own thoughts and what you know about college football, would you rank Florida in the top 25? I wouldn't. Hell no, I wouldn't. Knowing what you know about college football, would you rank Texas a top 5 team in the country? Hell no. And I think we all know that Texas is always going to be Texas and Notre Dame, both teams that are always given so much love preseason, and it, especially Texas, it never comes to fruition. So we've all been burned by Texas enough to know they're not a top 5 team in the country, or at least we wouldn't project them to be a top 5 team in the country. Per the FPI, Texas and Michigan on a neutral site, Texas would be favored by a very slim margin, but Texas would be favored. Now, if you could lay the points on Michigan against Texas, doesn't that seem like a no-brainer? Absolutely it does. So as much as FPI can kind of find things that we don't as college football observers with our own bias, like Tennessee last year. Nobody would have said that Tennessee was a top 5 team in the country. FPI said that they were, and Tennessee was number 1 at one point last season. So it's absolutely valuable in that regard. It's absolutely valuable to see, oh, wow, these teams, they're returning a whole lot of production. These teams have a very favorable schedule. But sometimes I think that, especially in this day and age of analytics and sports are very numbers driven, sometimes we get lost in the numbers and we don't see what we really know for ourselves. FPI can be that way. Don't get lost in the numbers. Don't get lost in the data breakdown and the analytics of the FPI. Don't take it as Bible, because you know what you know about Florida. And you know they're not the 18th best team in the country, and maybe they might end up being so. But right now, I can't go that far. So, while it's exciting, and it's not nothing that the FPI is projecting LSU to be a top 5 team in the country, that the FPI loves LSU the 4th most, take it with a grain of salt. Always this time of year. Coming up next, if y'all think that LSU women's basketball had a reputation, it might just get that much worse. And honestly, I love it. And I'll explain why coming up next. Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. So it is, there's a little celebrity on campus this week, and her name is Hailey Van Lith. And I'm sure that you've heard about it. I'm sure that you have. Hailey Van Lith is Louisville's top player. Louisville women's basketball has consistently been over the last 5 to 10 years one of the top programs in the country. They're always in conversation they always make the tournament, always in conversation in Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final 4, so on and so forth. Louisville basketball, women's basketball, well, basketball as a whole is a very strong program. Men's not so much this past year, but really overall program as a whole is very strong. And the women's basketball team is no different. And Hailey Van Lith, I believe, was easily the best player on their team this past season. Hailey Van Lith was averaging almost 20 points a game, 4.5 rebounds, so about 3-ish assists, shooting about 40% from the field, was lights out from the free throw line, almost 90% shooting her free throws. So Hailey Van Lith is a very solid player on a very, very solid team. Hailey Van Lith entered her name into the transfer portal about a week ago. Hailey Van Lith took a visit to LSU this past week. She was seen on campus. We know that she's gone through the meetings with LSU. And let me give you a basketball perspective and maybe a off the court perspective. On the court, holy moly, Hailey Van Lith would be just conductor of this team. LSU women's basketball this past season, losing Alexis Morris to the WNBA, losing LaDasia Williams to the WNBA. They're losing leadership, and they're also losing a good bit of offensive production. Hailey Van Lith would be the perfect piece to plug in. I'm not going to say that she would be an upgrade from LaDasia Williams or Alexis Morris because I don't think that would be very fair to LaDasia and Alexis Morris. But she absolutely would be a key that could help this team go from national title into another national title contender pretty flawlessly. That's the kind of player that Hailey Van Lith is. She's the kind of player that I believe kind of personifies the style of basketball that Kim Mulkey wants to play. Tough, hard-nosed defense, very physical style. That she effective offensively. That's kind of how I see Hailey Van Lith. She's a scrappy player. She's a tough player. She's a physical player. And she wants to win. Sound like anybody you know? Sound like a certain Kim Mulkey that we know? So I'm all on board. Hailey Van Lith and Angel Reese, that duo, whoo! LSU women's basketball easily would be the favorite to repeat for a national championship. Doesn't mean that you're going to. It just means that you're going to be a force. Look out, Dawn Staley in South Carolina, because you got a badass duo right there. Now let's look at it more of an off-the-court approach. I think LSU women's basketball, they're now the villains of women's college basketball. That's fine. I think villains are good for sports. Everybody, even Michael Jordan needed his Dennis Rodman. Villains are good. And that's what LSU women's basketball is. Kim Mulkey is well respected across women's college basketball. I don't think she's very well liked across women's college basketball. Don't care. Didn't come here to make friends. At the end of the national championship, Angel Reese made herself a little bit of a villain with the pointing to the finger and the "you can't see me." If anybody forgot that happened, like it wasn't the number one story in sports for the longest time. So that's what I think is going to be very interesting. Hailey Van Lith decides to come to LSU. When you thought you were the villains a couple weeks ago after the national championship, oh boy, you just got so much worse. You just got so much worse. Hailey Van Lith, they say she's a tough and a physical player. Man, can she talk. She is a talker. I'm sure you've probably seen that viral video after the Texas Louisville game in, I believe, Sweet 16. And it was a chippy little altercation between Hailey Van Lith and a Texas player. Basically, if my lip reading skills do me any services, which they have in the past, Texas player said, "Call me insert expletive here again." And Hailey Van Lith said, "Enjoy Miami." And I mean, obviously, I could totally be wrong. But basically, that's Hailey Van Lith saying, "Enjoy your vacation because we just knocked you out of the tournament." Hailey Van Lith is that kind of player. She doesn't take any crap. She's a trash talker. I have no problem with that. But just know, just be prepared that if this team gets Hailey Van Lith, they're going to have targets on their back. But you know what? I love it. Bring it on. I'll reiterate the same sentiment that I had after the national championship when Angel Reese was kind of painted as this villain, as this bad woman in sports. I don't care. It's good for the sport. Didn't come here to make friends, but you did come here to win games. And that's exactly what Hailey Van Lith would do if she came to LSU. They'd win a whole lot of games. But that's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Every dayers will break down what Brian Kelly had to say leading up to LSU's spring game. And of course, some basketball breakdown of the transfers in and the transfers out. All of that coming up on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU.